Welcome to Innersight, Health Optimization with Rudy and Shaun.
Okay, here we go. We live on our podcast number 9. Shaun, it's been quite a nice journey. Shaun has actually had quite a journey. If you look on the screen, he's had a journey with his arm, working on his VO2 max, and that's actually our subject for today. So we're not clever enough to talk about VO2 max. So we've asked our friends and who is the guru on that, and we found someone that is a co-PhD student. So she's becoming a doctor in VO2 max or exercise physiology, and she's joining us from Leuven in Belgium, where she's co-PhDing between Stellenbosch and Leuven University. Louise Engelbrecht. Welcome, Louise.
Welcome, Louise.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Yeah. We're nice and warm here in South Africa, so you're probably nice and cold there.
Yes, it's a rainy day, and I think it's 6 at the moment.
6 degrees, yeah. And I think it's about 26 or 36 here. It's nice and warm. Yeah. Let's move on. So, I mean, we in our podcasts, I don't know how many of them you've listened to, but it was us trying to bring someone in on the reason why we would screen them, how they are on the sick side, trying to find the big things that might kill them. Now we're looking forward. So now we say, but what can you do now to make sure you get to a good 80? So, and VO2 max is one of the big predictors, probably the biggest predictor about how good and how long you're going to live. But I mean, VO2 max, even for the athlete, is quite a word that we know, but it's not something that academically we have in our minds exactly what it is. So maybe you can bring us in to say what that is and how we go about knowing what your own one is.
Okay. Yes. So VO2 max, it's basically your maximum oxygen uptake by your muscles. So it represents your cardiorespiratory fitness. So we can divide your VO2 max basically into 2 parts. So the first part is your oxygen delivery. So your major organs involved in that would be your lungs and your heart. And then you have your muscle extraction or utilization, which happens at the muscles. So yeah, VO2 max is a marker that we use for endurance athletes to gauge their potential. So as a endurance athlete, if you want to be elite athlete, yes, you need a high VO2 max, but it's more than that. It's also related to, the functional capacity of human performance, so day-to-day tasks. And yeah, as you said, it's closely related to longevity and is an independent predictor of all-cause mortality. So having a low VO2 max will increase our risk for cardiovascular and cardiorespiratory diseases, while if we can improve our VO2 max, it's not necessarily going to make us live longer, but it will put more life into your years.
Louise, that's exactly why we use it in our program. Is exactly, I think it was Mayers et al. That did that study that said that you need a VO2 max of about 17.5 for activities of daily life. So what we like to do at Innersight is to reverse engineer that and say, okay, we, as Rudy mentioned it, is we want to create kick-ass 80 years olds. So we go and look at the VO2 max and say, okay, when you're 80, you at least need 17.5 to just do the normal stuff. Now imagine at 80 you get the flu or you become ill, then suddenly that can drop down a little bit and then you might need to cope. So we're actually aiming for higher than that. And you might even live to 90. So that's why we're going to try and get our clients as high as possible by the age that they're 80 or 90. And to know that, we need to know the VO2 max now. And then we work out more or less where we want them to be now.
Yeah, so sorry, just to correct you there, it's 17.5 liters per kilogram per minute, yeah.
Yeah, so, and I mean, so 17.4.
Yes, 17.
And if you measure in the lab, what does that look like? I mean, some of our people would have had a VO2 max test, but a lot of people out there wouldn't have had one. So, what does it look like?
Yes. Okay, so in the lab, you can either do the test on a bike or a treadmill, and depending on the protocol, it's always a graded exercise test. So you begin at a fairly low intensity, easy manageable intensity, and then you gradually increase till exhaustion. So you can, if you purely want to look at the VO2 max, we'll use what you call a ramp protocol. So for the bike test, that would be maybe 20 watts in a minute. So every 3 seconds you go up with a watt, for example. For a running test, that can maybe be 0.5 kilometers an hour every minute that you increase. But then if you maybe don't have time to do your threshold test and your VO2 max test separately, then you can use a step protocol so that you can reach a steady state at each intensity. So that will be, maybe minimum 2.5 minutes, up to 5, some even use 8 minutes at an intensity. And then you'll jump with a bigger increments. And that will also be till exhaustion.
Okay. And can it differ, or does it always differ? Or so a cyclist will have a lower VO2 max running, I presume, than they would have cycling. They use different muscles, or how does that work?
So if you are very trained in one discipline, there will definitely be a difference in your VO2 max. Generally, potentially, your VO2 max will, if you similarly conditioned, slightly higher on running, just because you're activating more muscles during the activity as opposed to cycling, which is predominantly leg muscles. So yes, there might be a difference, but with that said, often with sedentary individuals or obesity individuals, they prefer to use the cycling test, just because it's a bit maybe lighter on the joints, and walking or running can be uncomfortable.
Okay, but they should, in any case, have a very, very close. Yeah. Okay.
So if we test one of our clients and we give them the choice and they start off with a running test, then preferably we will keep at the running test if we retest them, I suppose.
Yes. So whatever test you select and mode, running or cycling, or the protocol that you use, preferably with a retest, you'll use the same mode and the same protocol.
Okay, and then things that influence it. Let's say we get a blank slate, someone you've never seen before. So genetics a big thing or not? Altitude, yes. Anything like that? What?
So there are a few factors that will influence your VO2 max. Genetics is one of them, but I think what we've seen over the past couple of years, maybe not as big a role as we always thought. So traditionally we thought 40 to 60%, but it seems that the genetic component is more linked to your trainability. So how quickly you can improve your VO2 max, and also it does influence the ceiling. Trainability has a big influence. So a sedentary individual has a much bigger scope of improving their VO2 max. So that will definitely have an influence of your value. And stuff like your muscle fiber types will also impact your VO2 max.
Well, that's good news for our mere mortals, to know that we can improve our VO2 max.
Yes, definitely.
So if we say we want to improve our VO2 max, so again, let's start with the sedentary individual. which side would you say? Do you start on the muscle side, or do you start on the ticker side, or the heart, or the lung side? Where I mean, I've got no idea. So, yeah.
Yeah, so there's two basically intensities or like exercise methods well established to improve VO2 max. So for your sedentary individual, I would actually recommend starting with the high intensity interval training. So with that type of training, you target the muscles, improvements at the muscular level, and you're also able to improve your VO2 max faster. So the sessions are shorter. So as we increase intensity, the volume comes down. So the training might be a bit more tolerable, even though it is at a high intensity. But with this type of training, we're then improving basically the exercise tolerance. And then it will improve their ability to sustain sub-maximal intensities for longer. And once they're more comfortable with exercise, then they can go to your type 2 training zones, LSD as well. But yeah, I would recommend actually starting with the high intensity interval training for the sedentary individual.
Yeah. So Louise, when you say that the interval training will improve the VO2 max in a shorter time, what are we talking about? Are we talking about weeks, months, days, usually?
Yeah, you can see improvements within 6 weeks. Weeks.
Yeah, so I mean that's quite interesting because there's quite a big focus on zone 2, but you need quite a lot of zone 2 to make a difference. So I mean we've talked on the podcast before about zone 2 making more mitochondria to have the bigger the bigger energy converter. And in that zone, you use more fatty acids. But I like what you're saying because, I mean, it is part of what we want to do is get people moving because this is such a difficult thing is to move the needle on a VO2 max. But because it's such a good predictor, we have to get people to move the VO2 max as high as they can.
So obviously, if it moves so quickly, then it must be related to the stroke volume that you increase or the cardiac width or both.
Actually, more of the adaptations are on a muscular level. They can be, it never happens in isolation, but the low intensity training is better for improving your stroke volume. So at the high intensity interval sessions, we are actually, because of the almost like the energy strain, we're producing more enzymes called AMPK, and that goes through a process which then produces more mitochondria. Okay, so that stimulates that. But with the low intensity training, we can improve the function of the mitochondria.
Okay. Very, very interesting. Okay, and on the cardiopulmonary side, so the heart and the lungs, is it you talked about stroke volume? I'm going to come back to the lungs. I want to know if you can make the lungs better, or is that what you were dealt with?
Yes. So if we look at healthy individuals, the lungs aren't really necessarily a limiting factor with VO2 max, but you get those devices like power lung or power breathe where you get resistance with exhaling. Some even have resistance with inhalation. So with those devices, you'll be able to improve your respiratory muscles. So that can then indirectly potentially lead to a bigger VO2 max, but also
But that's quite late in the day. That's really putting the cherry on the cake. That's not really for the average Joe out there, I presume. I mean, for us that are weekend warriors, you want at least 1 or 2 big zone 2 somewhere, hour plus, and then interval training. But I've spoken to a few cyclists, and they say if they really want to make a big difference in a short time. They say exactly what you're saying is 20 minutes warm up and then 4 times 4. So 4-minute intervals as hard as you can with 4 minutes rest 4 times, and then 20-minute cool down, and that's actually there move the needle the quickest, as you say, in 6 weeks. Is that the type of thing you see with cyclists there as well?
Yes. If you purely go to performance, and not necessarily looking at the health aspect, then yes, that that will help. But it depends on the phase of your training. Are you busy building your base, or are you are you in base training, or are you close to your race? Where are you in your season? Because there with cyclists or runners, I always tell them, if you want to build a big pyramid, you need a big base. And how do you build a big base? With your long, slow distance type of sessions. So the zone 2 sessions. Because if you have those basic endurance adaptations in place, they will also help you actually to improve the top end stuff better. And those adaptations are at the cardio level, the stroke volume, the higher plasma volume, and stuff like that.
Okay. So you talk about the pyramid. If you build that base, you pull the sides with the zone 2, but to pull the top is with the interval training. And if you don't have the base, that you won't build.
Yeah. So we talk often about polarized training. So there's different training methods, but with polarized training, 80% is your zone 2, 20% is the high intensity stuff.
Yeah,
so it's still a big part of your training.
Yeah, so that's exactly what we try and do with our clients as well, to do a 80-20 split once they, at that point. But I do like the high intensity to maybe start with that if they haven't done anything yet, just to get them, especially the exercise tolerance that you mentioned, to get them to a point where they can do both.
Yes.
And how long is the minimum zone 2 before you will see? I mean, does half an hour zone 2 work? Because most of the zone 2 training sessions I've seen is an hour plus, but actually 2 hours plus.
And I think the problem is that many of our patients doesn't have that much time. So if you say 80% of your time zone 2, but you only have 2 hours a week to exercise, that's not a lot of zone 2 then.
No. Then ideally, try to do your zone 2 training over the weekend. For health purposes, I would say at least 45 minutes, or maybe longer. In a sense, if you're going to start with walking, so some people, if they start out, their zone 2 might be a brisk walk or walk intensity. So then 45 minutes. If you're a cyclist, at least 90 minutes. You'll need a little bit longer to get that benefits, because so can I speak about the stroke volume and how we improve that with this intensity? So basically what we want to do, so stroke volume, that's the amount of blood that we pump out of the heart with each heartbeat. And if we want to pump out more blood, we need to fill the heart more. So we need to basically increase the filling time of the heart. And to be able to do that, we need a lot of repetitions. So if you only doing it for half an hour, that's maybe not enough to create that stimulus for adaptation. We want to maximally fill the left ventricular volume, and that happens at an intensity of 40 to 60% of VO2 max. So as soon as we go higher than 60%, then we're not like 100% with our stroke volume. So stroke volume starts to decrease a bit. So that's why we need this low intensity to be able to maximally dilate or fill the heart with each repetition.
Wow, it's actually then coupled to very close to where your lactate threshold is, and so I presume then your heart rate picks up quite a bit when you start going into or going over your lactate threshold, and so
Yes. So once the heart rate starts going up too high, then we're decreasing, that time we have for filling. So then we're not maximizing the stroke volume adaptations anymore. So this intensity is actually, way below our lactate threshold.
Okay, so we use the 180 minus your age as the top of zone 2 for most people, but it sounds like you can actually go a little bit lower because 180 minus your age gets you to about a 0.665 in that area. So of your or I mean the big calculation is 220 minus your age times 0.6, but the easy calculation is 180 minus your age. So but it sounds like you if you go slow for longer, it's even better. Am I understanding you correct?
Yes, definitely. So so I think for a lot of people, zone 2 training is actually a bit hard in the start because it's so slow. And the more conditions you get, that will shift up a bit harder, and it will maybe not be as easy like for your elite levels. Zone 2 is quite high already, but it's sometimes actually frustrating because you feel like, am I doing anything? Because it's so easy when you start getting start training. As I mentioned, for your runners or something, it can actually be a walking pace.
Yeah, but it still needs to be hard enough to produce an adaptation. So ideally, you would like to know where you lie in zone 2.
So if you don't have any marker, like a heart rate monitor or a calculation, or if you've done a test, a good reference is if you have to rate it out of 10, it should be not more than 4 out of 10, the intensity, and you should be able to still maintain a conversation at this intensity. So it's not that hard.
Yeah, so Shaun has done a video on that running, and I've done one cycling. So it should be on our link to go and look at the. So that's where we try and put the rate of perceived exertion out there. It's quite interesting to have seen those values change with athletes where they start. I mean, they start in their zone 2 where they can hardly stay on their bike, and now their watts in zone 2 is like almost 4 watts per kilogram. It is amazing, but it's so counterintuitive that people don't do it.
Yes, and in our lab, we work quite closely with a trail running coach, and they like to send their athletes once every season. So in the start of the season, and they really employ the zone 2 type of training. And what we've seen is with some of the athletes that came back, like their aerobic threshold, the anaerobic threshold with the first test moved up, everything moved up, and that's now the aerobic threshold. So there's really a lot of improvements if you just have the patience and you do the training properly. Because I think a lot of us, we get stuck in the middle, but the adaptations are really at the opposite ends.
So meaning that weekend warriors that go out for a ride in zone 3 and 4, that's not where you want to be.
No.
Yeah, I mean, that's a classical thing. We get someone showing us their Garmin watch, and say, listen, I've been in zone 2 for so many minutes, zone 3 for for X amount of minutes, zone 4 for yes. So we do need a little bit more of a plan, even though it's for general health. And that's what we try and do. We try to get dedicated zone 2 training periods and some dedicated high intensity training periods, as well as some resistance training. That's the ideal thing. So we really try and do that with our clients. I'm just thinking from a testing point, obviously you need to know numbers. You need to know your numbers to know if you improve or where we need to improve and things like that. So in the lab, obviously that's not a comfortable test. You've done one, Rudy. I think you've done one as well.
I've done, yeah.
Can you give us some insights and how does it feel?
Yes. So with the VO2 max, so you wear a mask. So it's not a oxygen mask, it's just a face mask with sampling lines connected to it. So we measure every breath to get your oxygen consumption, but the mask can be quite comfortable. Uncomfortable. We try to, make you as comfortable as possible with controlling the temperature in the lab and the aircon and a fan, but still, it's like it's fine in the start. As I mentioned, the test tends to be very easy at the beginning, and then all of a sudden it's not. And then and then it can be, if you're a bit claustrophobic or something, it's not always nice to have the mask on your face, especially if you someone that tends to sweat a lot. But it doesn't restrict you from breathing normally. So it might perceive it that way, but you can still get in the maximum amount of air.
Yeah, but you need to go to full intensity. So it's quite a harsh test.
Yes.
And where I'm going with this is there's two implications. So the first one, it's a slightly uncomfortable test to do, and there's also costs involved in doing the test. So obviously for us, from a health perspective, if you're an elite athlete, then there's no doubt you need to go get the testing done. But for the average Joe out there and for our clients, what other options are available to maybe get a approximate value of the VO2 max? Is something like the Garmin algorithm, is that okay? Is there some other tests out there that we can do? Because we at the moment use a calculated guess on where the VO2 max lies based on your heart rate, your resting heart rate and things like that. I would just like to hear from you what you think.
Yes, so there are a few indirect measurements that you can use. So there's various ones. There's ones that you can still do kind of in a laboratory setting, like a Bruce protocol on a treadmill, where you don't use the mask, but just the graded exercise test. For your team athletes, it's very expensive to to get the entire team through a lab. So then they'll use tests like the bleep or the yo-yo. But a good alternative might be the Cooper test. So that's a 12-minute test. For the test, though, to be more reliable, it's better to do it on a something like an athletics track, or a field where the surface is flat or something. But so then you'll do the 12-minute test. You record the distance, and based on that, you can then input the values in a formula to get you an estimated VO2 max.
Yeah, so Louise, currently we can use a Cooper test at our clinic, and we just put a 1% gradient on the treadmill to simulate outdoor things. But can you do that on a bike as well, or is that just for the running?
There are indirect bicycle tests. I can't remember the names for them now, but there are tests available on the bike. But it's not the Cooper one. It's a bit different.
Yeah, no, I mean, just coming back to how the predictor works. So we try and say to the clients when we test them that they will lose about 10 milliliters per kilogram per minute. So your VO2 max per decade.
Per decade, yes.
Yeah. So 10 per 10. So if you're now at a 40, I mean, you're going to struggle. Or if I'm now almost 50 years old, and if I'm only at a 30 now, I'm going to struggle when I'm 80. So you really, really have to work hard to have your VO2 max high. But the nice thing about VO2 max, it's trainable for a long time in your life, as long as your ticker holds, really. I mean, your muscles are trainable, so you just have to make sure that your heart is good. But you can train it at any time. And I think the other side is everyone has got a VO2 max. Everyone that's alive does have a VO2 max. So and can be trained. That I think that's the good thing. I mean, you see the top end of athletes, but the old granny has got one, the 30-year-old person has got one, but everyone is trainable. So
yes,
that's
yeah, yeah, exactly. So, I mean, like you speak about, you want people to be, healthy 80-year-olds, and the bottom line is, do you want to be an 80-year-old that can still play with their grandchild, or do you need assistance to just get out of your chair? And I think that's the problem with a lot of people. They just think of the now and not what am I doing to extend or improve my life in the long haul? What are my goals for when I reach 80? And, people can complain, I don't want to get old, but, well, what are you doing now to prevent that?
I think that's the beauty of the VO2 max. It's a number, but it actually captures all the benefits of exercise in a number. All the endothelial advantages of exercise and the fitness and everything that comes with that. So,
Exactly.
yeah, if we can get people to have a higher base at a younger age, so that when they reach 80 or 90, that it's not that low, and then by keep them active to try and reduce that decline over time.
Yes. So, and the bottom line is that, if your VO2 max drops below the 17.5 milliliters per kilogram per minute, you are going to use, a high percentage of your VO2 max at rest. So doing any activity, you're going to be exhausted sooner. And then eventually you have decomposition of your cardiorespiratory system, and that leads to a natural death.
And the other side is also true for me, is if someone has got a VO2 max of over 50, it's almost impossible for them to be a diabetic, because the system then works with the glucose better, with the free fatty acids, and that's why it's such a good predictor. Because I mean, my learning point in this was the muscular side is as important as your cardiopulmonary side. I mean, I never thought about it that way, but I mean, as you get fitter, your engine can handle the glucose better, and the uptake is better. And that's, I think, the teaching that we got from you today is high intensity stuff, move the needle, then get the zone 2 training in, and that then builds the cellular side versus the stroke volume. The stroke volume will come with the long stuff, but I mean,
yes. And that's exactly like doing the zone 2 training. As we mentioned earlier, will not potentially improve, the function of your mitochondria. So you'll improve that, insulin sensitivity. So you'll be reliant on less insulin to oxidize your glucose, and actually you're training your body to utilize fat better. And you're clearing the lactate. So your lactate clearance rate is improving at lower intensity. So you're bringing that lower for longer as well.
That's quite interesting, because they said someone like Tadej Pogačar has got a massive lactate clearance. So, which was something that's quite new in the thinking. Am I right? I mean, that's
Yeah. Well, yeah. So, I mean, we're all constantly producing lactate and clearing. And then, at your threshold, basically your production exceeds the clearance rate. So with your base training, that is, sorry, one of the focus of that training is to improve your clearance. So you basically being also able to utilize lactate as a fuel, as an energy, and convert that to ATP.
Yes, and that's exactly that. Even if you compare him to a metabolic unfit diabetic, then you see a metabolic unfit diabetic might have a lactate above 2 at rest. And that's the difference. At rest, they've got a higher lactate that he would generate after an hour or two.
And then, unfortunately, they're also not great at using fat as for as energy. So so it's kind of a double-edged sword.
Yeah. So, and coming back to VO2 max, that's then the needle that takes the moving. It's so difficult to move, but if you move your VO2 max, I want to say almost everything gets better. It is such a good predictor of all little horsemen that we've talked about up to now. It is.
I think people don't understand how important exercise is. If you look at the hazard ratios, if you look at something like smoking, you've got a 40% increase in all-cause mortality. But if you go compare the elite athlete with the lowest VO2, there's a 500-fold difference between the two. So there's no tablet, there's no intervention, there's nothing that can do that in medicine. The only thing is exercise.
Yes.
That's amazing.
So what is more actually the cause of the chair?
The comfort zone of our society, sitting down. You're absolutely right. Everything is just, we don't move enough these days. And in our podcast about the balance, we had this discussion as well, is that we're not moving anymore. And that's why we get all the problems. Not by choice. Sometimes you've got a job and you need to sit in the chair and you don't have an option, but that's what's happened over time. So now we need to do things to undo that.
Yes. And and I mean, you don't, if you're starting out, there's a lot of research that's shown that, you don't have to do your exercise at one session necessarily. You can have pockets of exercise throughout the day, like, 5 minutes session of high intensity interval, and that will be just as beneficial as if you do a half an hour high intensity session, for example.
Oh, that's excellent. So that's parking a little bit further away from the office so that you can walk that little bit. Getting up like after a couple of hours of work and not go for a smoke break, but actually just go for a quick walk, do some squats or some push-ups or something just to keep going.
Take the stairs, not the
take
chairs.
the stairs. And take the chair along.
Louise, so I just want to come back to your studies. How long are you in Belgium for still?
I'm here for a 6 months period. So we're busy with the recruitment, and study will start now on the 13th of March.
Okay, and then when you're back, are you writing up your PhD? I'm taking a long shot to see if people see this this podcast and they want, when you're back in South Africa, want to get hold of you for training advice or something. We can maybe put something in the link of the podcast so they can get hold of you.
So I'll be back in Stellenbosch. I'll be in the lab again from July. They can contact me via email.
Okay, we'll get all those details from you and they can contact you. And because I mean that's you live and breathe this stuff at the moment, and there are quite a lot of weekend warriors that just want that extra step. So it'll be quite interesting for people to get hold of you, and
Yeah, no, for sure.
Thanks for your time, Louise. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for inviting me.
It's awesome, and good luck with the rest of your PhD. It's very good to meet you, and we'll meet you in person when you're back in South Africa.
Yes, that would be nice.
Thanks so much. Go well.
Thank you.
Cheers. Bye. Bye.
Disclaimer. This podcast is not intended as a substitute for the advice of your healthcare provider. No doctor-patient relationship has been formed through this podcast. The content here is for information purposes only.